Need it. So joining us now, Lieutenant Colonel Sean Cross. He's a pilot with the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron, also known popularly as the Hurricane Hunters. Lieutenant Colonel, thanks for joining us on Midday, sir.
Hey, Gerard, thanks for having us. We always look forward to coming back and talking to you guys a couple of times a year just to kind of catch up and just see what's going on and let you guys know what we've been up to. It's been all quiet on the home front now, but, season's getting ready to crank up here in just a couple of weeks, so we're ready.
Absolutely. So the squadron was established in the 40s. Is that correct? Somewhere along those time frame?
Yeah, it's really quite an interesting and funny story. It was sort of like a bar bet. It happened way back in Bryant, Texas, and there was some Brit pilots training over in Texas, and there was a very courageous Army Air Corps pilot by the name of Lieutenant Colonel Joe Duckworth, and they bet him that he couldn't take that T-6 Texan and go out and fly into the eye of a hurricane. So like any courageous young Air Force pilot, he said, yeah, I'll take that bet, and he did it, and he was successful. They went up again, and he took a meteorologist on the second time, and on that day in July of 43, storm reconnaissance flights were born, and it's worked through the services throughout the decades, and here we are today, and it's all done by the Air Force Reserve right here in the great state of Mississippi at Keesler Air Force Base down on the Gulf Coast.
Wow. That's incredible. So often, of course, when you're taking off, when you're departing from Keesler, you don't have to go very far to find them when they're out there in the Gulf.
That's true. Sometimes when they're right here in the Gulf, we've got one that's making landfall, like back in 2018, Hurricane Michael was a very, very intense, strong Category 5 storm. We took off from home base. It was beautiful weather here, and, 35 to 40 minutes later, we were right in the belly of the beast, as I like to explain it, as it was bearing down on Tyndall Air Force Base over by Panama City, Florida. So, when they're in the Gulf, they're close to home, and we don't have to go very far, which is nice. It makes it for a short flight for us, but our friends and family members, anywhere from Texas all the way down to the tip of Florida, somebody could be feeling it. So we don't take that very lightly. We don't like it to get in the Gulf. It's kind of like a pinball machine, once the ball gets in the Gulf of Mexico, somebody's going to get it. We just don't know who until it finally makes landfall.
Where do you have to be, Lieutenant Colonel, to begin collecting meaningful data about a storm? Let's say a large hurricane out in the Gulf, for example. Where does the aircraft have to be positioned as it pertains or as it relates to the storm itself to collect that data?
That's a great question, Gerard. And what we do is we've got 10 aircraft here. That gives us the ability to fly 3 different storms simultaneously, around the clock, 24/7 operation. So what we always want to do is have the operation in a position to where we can continue to fly the storm until it makes landfall. Case in point, Hurricane Katrina. There's just a couple of us left that flew in Katrina. I'm one of them. It made landfall right here, as we all know. So we could not fly the operation from Keesler. So we packed up and we moved to Ellington Field in Houston, Texas, which put us in a really good position to be close enough to fly the storm continuously, but also out of harm's way so the aircraft don't get damaged while they're on the ground. So we can operate pretty much anywhere, Gerard. All we need is an internet connection, a cell phone, and a hotel room, and we can roll 24/7 and a runway to operate from. I call it a traveling road show because when we go on the road, it's 3 airplanes and about 65 people to sustain that round-the-clock operation.
Wow. So once you're in the aircraft and you're approaching the cyclone, are you flying through it to get inside the eye or flying above it, staying outside of it, and just following it? How do you operate at that point?
What we do is we fly at 10,000 feet pressure altitude, and we punch right through the eye wall. We don't have the performance to go over the top, and even then, that would not satisfy the scientists at the National Hurricane Center in Miami, Florida. I mean, we have to punch right through. It's at that standard millibar level because that's where they like to take all of the readings of what's going on inside the hurricane. And we'll maintain that pressure altitude all the way through. We'll fix the center of the storm, which is the lowest center of pressure, and we'll establish that by latitude and longitude. We'll mark that spot. We'll send all of the data that's collected from the drop sonde, which is the instrument that falls vertically from the aircraft. It's a small tube with it's kind of like a flying cell phone, I call it, and it's taking readings of temperature, pressure, winds, and humidity every 10 feet. We take all of that information together. We build our vortex data message. We send it via satellite uplink down to the National Hurricane Center in Miami, Florida. And from there, they take that information and they plug it into their forecast models, and that's how you see the cone on television when you're watching all the media outlets of where the storm is going to make landfall.
That's incredible. That it really is. So, is there danger to the aircraft? I mean, certainly you've got to be careful about how you navigate and just operate the plane once you're inside the eye there, right?
Yes, sir. It's kind of interesting because for Air Force pilots, we're doing the complete opposite of what we were trained. We were trained to avoid weather at all costs.
Exactly.
And here we are, flying into the belly of the beast. While we're en route, we have to follow our normal regulations of weather avoidance. But when we get to the storm, the rule book is sort of out the window, so to speak. And, we're punching through the eyeball there at 180 knots, which, doesn't sound like it's really fast. But that's our thunderstorm penetration airspeed, which the engineers at Lockheed Martin have calculated to obviously be fast enough to fly the aircraft, but slow enough to cause minimal stress to the airframe. So the plane flexes really good. I can look out the window and see the wings going up and down as we're getting pushed around and stuff, but it holds on. And it's kind of like if you were on an airliner and you get severe turbulence and your coffee went up and hit the ceiling and came back down in your lap. That's kind of what we experience at times in some of these storms.
So, Lieutenant Colonel, you mentioned earlier you were in the aircraft and tracking Katrina 2005, 18 years later. How has the technology markedly changed over that period of time as far as tracking these hurricanes, these storms, and collecting data?
That's a really good question. We still do things the way they did back in the 70s and 80s and even back into the 60s. We do have a new piece of equipment on the aircraft. It's called the Smurf pod. It stands for Step Frequency Microwave Radiometer. It's a lot of big words there for New Orleans boy like myself. But anyway, what this thing does, it's out on the wing, and it sends a little signal down to the surface, and it's measuring sea foam activity. And with that, it tells us exactly what the wind speed is at the surface. Because that's really, really crucial, because nobody cares what the crews are experiencing at 10,000 feet, because you guys aren't going to feel that. But we need to know exactly what the wind speed is down at the surface. And it's a really, really great tool. We've had it for about 15 years. We did not have it in Katrina. It would have definitely helped out, but it's an extremely valuable tool. And we worked with the Department of the Navy a little bit. We've had some people on board the last, say, 12 years. They've been dropping some different buoys to get some different readings on the storm. They actually dive down to a depth of like 50 meters, come back up, and that gives us a temperature reading at that 50-meter depth. Because you got to think about it, as a hurricane's moving across a large body of water, it's actually churning it up. It's like a giant blender. And the fuel source is out in front of the hurricane, and that fuel source is the warm water. So the scientists like to know, hey, what's that temperature way out in front? Because from that they can help predict whether or not the storm's going to get stronger or weaker.
Yeah, makes total sense. So the Lockheed WC-130J is the reconnaissance aircraft that's used. Is it specially built? I'm thinking about the airframe and what you mentioned earlier, stress on the airframe. Is it different than a typical aircraft of that style in order to withstand the stress?
No, sir, it's not. It is a standard C-130. I can go out into the Air Force inventory right now and grab any C-130 out there and fly it through the eye of a hurricane. The only difference is we've got a little bit stronger set of algorithms that affect the weather radar to penetrate the really intense rainfall and stuff that we get. And then we just have two pallets on board, that one's for the meteorologist on board and one for the loadmaster, that deal specifically with the weather stuff. But It's not structurally beefed up at all. It really isn't.
That's fascinating. Lieutenant Colonel Sean Cross has been our guest. He's a pilot in the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron, also known as the Hurricane Hunters. Lieutenant Colonel, appreciate you joining us. Very informative, sir. And I'm hoping that you don't have to go up too often to track storms this season.
I hope it's quiet, and I just want to give a good shout-out to the men and women of the 403rd Wing. There's over 1,600 citizen airmen across the country that come here for drill 1 weekend a month, and we could not pull off any of these missions if it wasn't for each and every one of those people that are part of this unit here at Keesler Air Force Base.
Absolutely. Appreciate that. Thanks for joining us. We're coming right back here in the Element Wealth Studios at Mississippi Blood Services.